to use the act of breathing to shape air into sounds that take on the context of language that lifts and transports those who hear it, takes them beyond what they think and know and feel, and empowers them to think and feel and know even more. We're all storytellers, really. That's what we do. That is our power as human beings. Not to tell people how to think and feel and therefore know, but through our stories, allow them to discover questions within themselves. Turn off your TV and your devices and talk to each other. Share stories. Be joined, transported, and transformed. Whew. Okay, we are going to share our stories and let's see what kind of transformation we can create here in our virtual community. So for those of you that are new to the Inspired Results Group community, I always forget to introduce myself. I'm Diane Lloyd. I'm the founder of Inspired Results Group, and we are passionate about all things leadership. We love to create spaces for learning about leadership, and coaching is also what we do. I am joined today. I'm going to introduce Andrea, our guest, in a moment. I want to introduce you to Nicole Sampson, who is my colleague within Inspired Results Group, and she plays an essential role here in this space today. So Nicole, I just want to invite you in to say hello and just let the group know how they can access you and your role.
I think we lost Nicole.
Are you kidding?
Not kidding. She disappeared and you became host. I think maybe her.
Oh my goodness, poor Nicole. That's going to stress her out greatly, and we don't want that. So if I am back with my hands on it, let me just pull up. Then I will continue to let people in through the
I'm letting people in, but you can take over when I start talking.
Oh, poor. So Nicole is here to support the technology, and isn't that ironic? And so Nicole is just, I will just brag on about her amazing presence. She is our manager of operations. She is so caring and supportive to the Inspired Results Group community. And when she's back in the room, she will be available to, if you have questions today, we would absolutely invite you to use the hands up and use your voice to ask your question or share your story. You can also message Nicole through the chat or put your question in the chat, and she's going to monitor the chat when she's back in the room. So this is how we roll these days in Zoom. So thank you, Andrea, for being such a great partner here. Let me just set the stage a little bit about just level setting around virtual learning and how we like to roll here in the Masterclass. You have made the commitment to yourself to be here for an hour. So do what you need to do to stay focused and present, and be present with your thoughts and feelings. That is part of the experience of leadership. And we're here. This is a super safe container for us to feel some stuff and explore some conversations. We would love you to stay muted just so we don't hear anything you don't want us to hear. Obviously unmute when you're sharing your voice. We love to see your faces if you can keep the camera on. Otherwise, you're welcome to turn the video off if you're Wi-Fi or just for pure comfort. The session is recorded. I'm not sure if it's being recorded in this moment, so let me actually do that.
Yeah, I hit record as well. So
you're a star, Andrea. Thank you. We'll see where that recording lands. So I'm just transparent about the recording so everyone knows when we're in this main room, the recording is on. We've, I think, pinned ourselves. I'll double check on that. Here's my new tip for Zoom is if you find it overwhelming to always be seeing yourself reflected back, there's a lot of research now that says that is actually causing some mental fatigue. So there's hide self view, which you can find in your screen in the top right, those 3 white dots. If you click on that and scroll down, you can choose hide self view. And I do that all the time now because I don't really need to see myself all day long. We'd love to hear your thoughts and your insights, any questions you have in the chat, and we'll do our best to monitor. And I really would love you to use the reactions button, put your hand up if there's something you'd like to bring in. And most of all, just stay curious, open, and engage with us here in the Learning Lab. So what is the Learning Lab? Here comes Nicole back in. I had this idea back in the fall that I really wanted a space to experiment and to learn and engage with this community. And so when you have your own business, that's the best thing, is I can create the space and I can create the conversations that I want to have and need to have, which is absolutely what this conversation today is all about. And I was thinking about like how to transition into this conversation. And I think the most authentic way to do that is to be honest about my experience over the last few years. And really, I feel like I've been on this awareness journey, seeking to understand, what does belonging mean? What is diversity, inclusion, equity? What does this mean? And it was all of the shame that showed up for me last year and the discomfort of that and all those things that inspired me to start to get more curious about this topic and educate myself, elevate my awareness, sit in that discomfort. And because I'm in Dare to Lead all the time, facilitating, we always asked our Dare to Lead participants, where do you want to be braver? What's the next arena for you to step into and be brave? And that this is the arena I want to be braver in. And I want to get uncomfortable and get educated and start to change myself and start to create spaces that really are more inclusive, more diverse, and truly create a sense of belonging. So I'm assuming I'm not alone in this desire for learning. And when I decided, okay, Masterclass, let's do this in the Masterclass, Andrea, of course, was the first person I thought of. And Andrea is a very credentialed, educated person. And what I wanted to share are some words that were really present for me this morning, Andrea, as I was thinking about sharing this space with you today. And I'm just literally getting goosebumps when I think about how freaking brave you are, how resilient you are, how loving you are. When I think about you as a mother, and how intelligent you are and curious, and your desire to keep learning inspires me so much. And so I'm so grateful that we are connected in all the ways that we've been connected, and to have you here to support us all in this conversation I'm just so full of gratitude in this moment. So let me stop sharing and I'll let you bring up your slides and just welcome you into this space, Andrea.
Thanks so much, Diane. And yeah, so grateful for our relationship and the opportunity to do some fun things together. So I'm really pleased to be here, and I'm going to share some slides and kind of walk the group through a bit of an orientation to the space. And then I know we're going to create some space for us to have a conversation. So you may have noticed on my bio slide that I did some work with Minister Qualtrough over this last year. And I just really loved this quote that she brought to the UN Convention of States Parties on the Convention of Rights with Persons with Disabilities in December, which is we talk about systems being broken, but the systems aren't broken. They're functioning exactly as they were built. They just weren't built for all of us. And that resonated so strongly, particularly in the year we've been in, where we've raised our awareness and our consciousness about the number of people who are excluded from opportunities for a variety of reasons. But it's all been about how we've created systems and structures. So and I know Mark will smile, but I kind of talk about systemic exclusion, and that we've built systems and structures on systemic exclusion. And the time has really come that we have to revisit those. We should have revisited them a long time ago, but there's no more excuses. We have to revisit and figure out how we start to change the dynamic. And those systems were really built by a certain demographic of our population, to Minister Qualtrow's point. They were often built by straight, white, middle to upper class men. And so this quote particularly strikes me for some research from 2006, but I would say it resonates today, that 45% of straight white men cover at work. So covering it means they don't show up as their authentic selves. So they're hiding parts of their personality. So if straight white men can't show up in the ways they want and need to, what does that say for the rest of us? And it just strikes me that this is such a huge opportunity for us to shift cultures and think about how we're showing up and supporting folks to be successful. And I think a lot of this issue comes from sort of this power over versus power with dynamic that we exist in. And so when we think about power over, it's that hoarding of power, that trying to keep power because you think that there's only so much of it. It's really about command and control, which leads to fear. And fear leads to mistakes and hiding mistakes. And so in organizations and cultures, that means that people kind of keep things in, they're trying to protect themselves. And ultimately, what we've seen is that that's leading to death of marginalized people in our society. So if we shift to sort of that power with, power to, and think about power actually being an infinite structure and how we can share that and connect with each other and empower each other, it really fosters a totally different environment where it's about innovation and creativity and supporting each other to be better and show up better. And I think that really connects quite strongly to the concept of privilege. And in this year, we've learned a lot about privilege. Privilege has been a really present concept for us and one that we've been exploring and people are diving into and trying to figure out what does their privilege mean and how can they show up to use that privilege, I'm going to say for good instead of evil. And so privilege is about not knowing what you don't know because you've never had to know it. You're learning about it rather than living it. And so when we think about these structures of power and privilege and the opportunity that we have in these moments in this year to shift how we've shown up in those power structures and how we use our privilege to actually move to creating systemic inclusion. And systemic inclusion is about opening the doors, exploring who each other are, figuring out how we bring people in and support them to be successful. And so this all connects to this concept of diversity, inclusion, and a step further, belonging. And diversity is really about who people are and getting to know who they are and understanding those different aspects of how people show up. And we know people aren't one identity. None of us are one thing. We have all of these beautiful components of who we are and how we show up in the world that are called intersectionalities. And so thinking about how those different intersectionalities connect, both in terms of our individual personalities and experiences and how we think and behave in the world, but also connecting that to when we look at these systems and structures, what are some of those barriers that are showing up because of how those systems and structures have been developed, not because of who you are, but because of how society has structured things. And that creates the opening and the door to look at better ways to include. So inclusion is really about what you need to be successful and exploring the concepts of equality, doing the same thing for each person versus equity, which is doing meeting people where they're at and supporting what they need to be successful. And ultimately the concept of social justice, where we're actually breaking down those barriers and rebuilding systems and structures to actually bring people in. So when we think about diversity being who you are, inclusion being what you need to be successful, and then moving to this concept of belonging, which is ultimately what I believe the outcome of this work needs to be. It's about how people feel wherever they are in whatever ways they're showing up, making sure that they have that feeling of being there and being whole and capable in those moments. And that's really where we're trying to move the work, is to shift to cultures of belonging. So it's kind of beyond that, just the concept of inclusion. It's actually about people and people being the center of the work. So that brings us to this concept of humanizing, and humanizing and rehumanizing is a topic that I would say is gaining kind of momentum and energy in thinking about these spaces, because humanizing is about seeing people for who they are with all of their identities and celebrating and supporting those aspects. And it's the rehumanizing concept is really about kind of that opportunity to learn, explore, celebrate, support people to be successful, and appreciate the diversity of what's around us and who's around us and how they're showing up, and exploring what they need to be included and to be supported so that they can ultimately belong. So we offer you a belonging continuum to kind of think about this space. And so if we think about diversity being within everyone, every single person is diverse in how they're showing up. We just have different aspects of diversity that show up for each of us. So in diversity, thinking about how we create that welcoming environment so people feel welcomed. And then supporting safety, psychological safety is such a crucial part of this, so that people know they can be whole and seen and supported for who they are. And then really continuing to engage people and building inclusion through that engagement to support them, which will allow people to continue to show up in those spaces and places and feel like they can commit to being there, which leads to belonging and that feeling of belonging. And, in this conversation today, I would challenge each of you to think about a time when you've really felt like you belonged somewhere. Not that you changed yourself to fit in somewhere, but where you really showed up and belonged. And Diane was one of our first guests a year ago on Bridges of Belonging, which have been conversations about different journeys of belonging and kind of exploring and digging into those journeys and figuring out, like, what does that look like for different people and how do they show up and who they are, so they have a supported experience and ultimately feel that they can belong in those spaces and places that were often not built for them. And so, yeah, we're just coming up on a year. Next week, we have our year of our anniversary of Bridges of Belonging. So we'll be sharing lots of content around that and featuring some with Diane. And then Mark's on the call. He was on some as well. So watch out for those. So I leave you with this quote as we dive into the conversation today, thinking about, like, how do we approach this space? It seems kind of daunting, but it's really about a learning journey and kind of figuring out how we learn about each other, how we learn about ourselves, how we create these supportive environments. So this quote from Maya Angelou is what we root a lot of our work in. Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. So I will stop slides there and come back into the conversation so that Diane and I can navigate through this. And over to you, Diane.
Oh, over to me. I'm absorbing, and I have a bazillion questions coming up here. So I'm going to ask a few questions, and then I have a sense that there's a ton of questions in people's minds in the room. So I want to create some space for other people's questions. And when I think about belonging and how many experiences I've had of not feeling like I belong, and then looking at me and realizing how much privilege I hold, how much accessibility has been available to me. And so if I have often felt like I don't belong, then what a blind spot that I have not seen or appreciated other people's challenges to belong. So that, the shame that comes up around that, and that can paralyze me. And now what do I do? And then I'm still paralyzed. Like, now what do I do? And so what support or tips would you give us when we're noticing that paralysis?
Yeah, and the whole piece around shame, I think, is so prevalent, particularly in this year, because I would say you don't know what you don't know, right? Which is why we root the work in Maya Angelou's quote, because I think as you start to know, then how do you show up in that and how do you navigate forward? And that concept of shame, uh, people react differently to shame. We talk about shame shields in the Brené Brown work. So, you either kind of invert away from it and kind of hide from it, or you act in ways that are probably unhelpful in terms of navigating it. And so I think in this work, we need to think about how do we remain curious to learn? How do we show up with that openness and continue to root it in people and that concept of humanity and thinking about like each person is an individual and they're human. And if we were to treat each person the way you'd treat your mother or your sister or your brother or your child, if we think about rooting people in that same level of empathy and compassion and commitment to who they are, what a different world we would have.
Mhm.
Like we distance ourselves from some of these situations that are happening, and part of that is for sure a coping mechanism. But if we started to root it in like how do we care for people the same way we care for our family and our friends that we love so deeply, how different would our world be?
Mhm. Just get goosebumps thinking about a world that's grounded in that. And so you've had all these conversations about belonging. So here's a question that I didn't send you and tell you I was going to ask you. So it's coming up. And uh, what are two or three key things that we could all take away and practice doing that you've learned over the last year sitting in these conversations?
Yeah, great question. I think the first one, and it's come up quite a bit through the conversations, is really that concept of belonging to yourself first.
Mhm.
So, how do you show up for you, and how do you just really embrace who you are and use that as a rooting place to start from? Because if you're not accepting and supporting yourself, you really can't do this work with or to support others. So, you have to start with you. And that's really hard. Like, if you think about the places where people feel like they belong, like when we ask that question, it is fascinating to me how many people have never really asked themselves where they feel like they belong. And one of the pieces of work I've been doing with a research group that's based at the University of Alberta, but has these unbelievable minds and thought leaders from across the country as part of it, we've been talking about elsewheres. And
Mm.
elsewheres is a concept by a researcher, writer named Tuck and Yang have written about it quite a bit. And elsewheres is really about like, where is that place that you would go to where you just feel like you can be you and where you can belong? And it's often not where you are.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so, how do you kind of think through like, what do you need to do to support you to actually belong in your own life?
Wow. What
Yeah.
the, yeah, that self-love piece, the self-compassion piece. Yeah, it is, and it's challenging. I have a lot of practice to do there. Um,
I
what
think
else?
I think
What,
many of us do.
yeah, but I don't think I'm hanging out alone on this one. And I just want to name it like, whoo, yeah, lots of opportunity to practice that. What else have you learned that would support us?
That opportunity to learn about each other, I think, is also really powerful. And, to my point about like, how do you kind of show up and support and love people that you may not have ever met? Like, how do we begin to focus on people first rather than getting caught up in the systems and structures that kind of block us from including people and supporting people in the ways they need? So, if you can start with yourself and then start to learn about those around you and thinking about and creating opportunities to welcome them in and support that learning journey. I also think, the unlearning side of things is really important in the year we've been through because we didn't learn about some of the truths in our history. And so we come in with all of these biases and, kind of ingrained discriminatory practices because that's how we were raised and that's what we've been taught. So we have to spend time and invest time and energy in unlearning some of that in order to show up, to learn and be open.
Mhm.
And that's really powerful. And that ties back to that shame piece too, right? Like you only know what you know. And so how do you open yourself up to know differently and know different truths than what have been taught to you to date?
Mhm. And sit in the discomfort of that
Yeah.
and keep moving forward. With self-compassion and curiosity, those are actually the two themes that I'm taking away so far, just so far. Okay, here I'm really feeling like I want to open up the opportunity for others to ask questions. I feel like there's a lot of questions in the space. So if you can use the reactions button to put up your hand, to come on in and ask Andrea your question, the reactions button will help me keep track. So come on in. We're going to spend 10 minutes asking your curious questions. And you know me, the group that knows me knows I'll wait you out. So we'll sit here in some beautiful silence until somebody asks a question. Danielle, come on in.
Hi, Diane, and hi, Andrea. My question is, when we talk about, like loving everybody the way that or treating everybody and showing up for everybody the way that we would our family and our friends and the people we care about, is there like concern about burnout there? Like, I don't want to think that there is a like capacity for my love and my affection, but like, there is also just a realistic amount of love and affection and patience that I have in a day. And sometimes I give it all to my colleagues and then I have none for my husband and my daughter. And sometimes I don't have it for my colleagues, but I have it for my husband and my daughter. So what kind of like thoughts are there around something like that?
Yeah, what a lovely question and an important question, because I would say part of that comes back to kind of that self-care, self-compassion, like taking care of you so that you can take care of others. So for sure, you need to be conscious of and aware of and supporting yourself in doing this work and navigating forward and how you can show up differently. And I'll maybe add on to the love piece in that I think, I use love to kind of root us in it because I think most of us can really resonate with that. Really, it's a lot of empathy pieces that need to show up in this work and in connecting with others. And I think empathy is a bit of a harder one for us to wrap our heads around. That's why I use kind of love to root us in it. But I think empathy is that piece of being able to relate to someone's emotion and connect with them on that level so that we can show up and support them in the ways that they need. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we're giving ourselves away in doing that, but how are you showing up for them in a way that supports them? So I don't know if that helps, but that would be my reply.
Mm. And I just feel compelled to add on. I just have this phrase of, I don't know how this will land, but I'm thinking about it as not so much an act of doing, but a way of being, so that there's not a burnout of output, but kind of a mindset and just a way of being in the world that is infused with love. And yeah, I don't, so, and Danielle, I just wanted to offer that up, and I don't know if that's resonating or adding to your question, but great question.
I think that connects so well, Diane, with that power over versus power with concept, right? Like, how do we show up with people? And yeah, so I would.
Nice. Nice. Thank you. Bill, come on in.
Thank you. I'm Director of Talent Management with Crawford Connect in Toronto, and we serve the nonprofit sector with executive search services. So we've long known about diversity as it applies in recruitment. But I'd be interested in your thoughts on how inclusion and belonging might impact or be part of a search process. Any thoughts there?
Ooh, part of a search process. Okay. I like the question. Thank you for that. So a couple pieces come to mind. I mean, you won't keep diversity if you don't create an inclusive workplace, right? So there's that connection. But in terms of a search, an actual search function, I think my reply would be that how do you create the space for people to show up in that search, so that they can be authentic and show up as they are? And I reflect on experiences around, yes, we know that diversity is important, but we haven't necessarily done all the things we need to do to support it to show up. So I'll give an example of a couple of years ago. I was at a discussion around diversity in a variety of sectors, and it was probably one of the most diverse rooms I've ever been in. And at the table I was at, there was 10 of us at a table. One individual identified as Indigenous. I was there as, probably one of the few white people in the room. And then the rest of the group was immigrants to Canada who had been here for a while. And every single one of them, other than myself and the Indigenous, had had to change their name, whitewash their name in order to get an interview. And so, for me, that's like, how do we create the inclusion so that you can show up with your diverse name and your diverse background and be seen and heard, and the openness to go through the same process that everyone should have the right to go through.
Thank you.
Great question. Beautiful answer. Thanks, Andrea. Ruth, come on in with your question. You're muted though.
Hi there.
Hello.
Hey, everybody. So I'm coming at you from Ontario, where I manage a group of nurses. And when your first slide there shows, 40% or 45% of straight white males don't show up as themselves at work. As a leader, I wonder about just the basic workplace, making it a safe place for people to show up authentically. We do put in hiring practices where we can hire a whole diverse group of people. We put in, we just had a big survey on inclusion to make sure and to assess where we're at. I guess I'm just looking for some tips on, the everyday. We've come over the last few years where people say the workplace is unsafe because you can't make a joke about anything without offending somebody. So it becomes more of a sterile environment, more of an afraid to open your mouth because you might offend somebody, because we don't know what we don't know. So how do we kind of bridge that gap to a safe place when we know, like I am a person of privilege in a workforce that allows power for women, but I'm white. So I don't know what there is out there. Do my best, but I'm just looking for some, something more boots on the ground. What do you do to help your team relax and be themselves?
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. Great question. The work we do with organizations is really about having those conversations and figuring out how people get to know each other on a different level, and trying to work towards building that culture of understanding and appreciating the diversity and the backgrounds folks are bringing. And in building those relationships, creating safety in how people are relating to each other and connecting with each other, but also in that learning, kind of building on top of that, not just learning about each other, but learning about some of the cultural context that folks need to be aware of in order to, I'm going to say, know a little bit more about what they might not know, so that the pairing of the two starts to bring together that culture of inclusion.
Andrea, I'm going to build on Ruth's question because I'm wondering about, like, as part of belonging and creating safe spaces is to normalize the fact that we will screw it up. We will say the wrong thing. And in our group, we'll take ownership, or we'll help each other see our blind spots in a really loving and supportive way, not a shaming and blaming way. I feel like that's a shift we all need to make.
Yeah, no, such a great comment. And that concept of calling in versus calling people out so that they can learn from the experience and show up differently next time. But it's also a piece around accountability too, so that, you know, when something happens, people have that opportunity to share what that experience was like for them and connect with each other and have a meaningful conversation about it so that you can continue that learning journey.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Ruth, for a great question. Okay, we're going to have time for one more question. Sherry's got her hand up. Come on in, Sherry.
That's a lot of pressure.
No pressure. No pressure. So good to see you.
You too, Diane. Good morning. I think it's really refreshing to be in a group that's not just educators. I'm a principal in Edmonton. So inclusion it's a loaded word in the education world. And I'm sitting with a few things that you said, and from a leadership perspective, this is really complicated work. And to open yourself up to learn different truths as a leader. What advice would you give, perhaps, to move forward with the idea of belonging? I'm also thinking, there's the word flourishing that's out there. I'm doing some research on creating cultures of wellness, and so I feel like it all fits together. But what offering would you give us leaders out there that are trying to wade through this messy work with all these complications?
Yeah, I was actually gonna start by saying it's a complicated space, and right now more so probably than ever before. And to kind of Ruth's question as well, like more sensitivities than ever before. So a couple of offerings I would give you. One is to take as many education and training pieces as you can, because the more you have in your kind of tool belt of learnings, the better off you'll be. And then also to connect with folks on your team who can help support your learnings, and creating the space for them to really share what's showing up for them, and making sure that that team is diverse in their experiences so that they're helping to inform you and support you along the way. And we're really intentional on our team about having a super diverse team so that we can bring those different experiences to the organizations that we're working with. But it also helps me every single day, because I am literally learning from our team every single day and every conversation. So I don't know if that helps support you a little bit, but those would be kind of the first couple of offerings I would give you.
So much learning to be had. Andrea, thank you for being brave and being willing to answer questions in the moment, which is always a gift to watch you support in the moment. I'm just going to bring up my question, because what I know about this community, and I also have learned as a facilitator on Zoom, is that all the magic happens in the breakout room conversations. And in this whole conversation, we need to have conversations with one another and be vulnerable with one another around this, and be authentic. That word's come up a lot today. So we're going to move you into breakout rooms for that opportunity for connection. And here's the question that I want you to lean on as you arrive in your small group. What emotions or thoughts has this conversation sparked for you today? So start with that question. And if a step is occurring to you, a step you'd like to take next, if you have one, offer that up to your group. And if you don't, that's okay. The surfacing and naming the emotions and the thoughts that are coming up for you is the question I really want you to sit with. And Nicole, while you're building those breakout rooms on the fly, could you set the timer for 8 minutes for those rooms, please? And that'll give us a little bit of closing time as we come back together.
All right, we're all set. I'll send everyone to the rooms.
Enjoy. Yay. We can probably go back to the main room. Oh, I've got, all my screens are jumping around here. There you are. So good. Your answers are so amazing.
Oh, thanks.
And that's, yeah, in the moment, that's a lot.
Yeah, well, we didn't get any that were too tough, but
No, I'm sure you get some really challenging questions in this.
well, we also I'm gonna pause.
Back. People are going to start rolling back in. Welcome back. Welcome back. Let me just bring up my slides. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. I'm going to resume recording. All right. Well, I always trust that lots of good stuff surfaced in the breakout rooms. And we're going to move forward. Andrea, I just want to circle back because we were talking about some of the comments in the chat, and just any summarizing overarching thoughts to support folks.
Yeah, there was one question around sort of, it was specific to executive coaching and sort of how you support someone who is maybe going through the same thing that you're navigating personally. And I think it resonates on a higher level around sort of leadership and how leaders can support others in navigating situations when they're navigating similar. And, you know, first of all, it's really about kind of meeting people where they're at and supporting them in that. But secondly, it's like, what are you doing to support you and build your resilience and your supports for yourself so that you're navigating it and then can support them in parallel to that. So, you know, whether that's your own coaching, your own learning journey, your own counseling supports, like whatever those pieces are that you need to support you to show up, that then allows for you to support those around you, would be our offering.
I love my coach. I love my counselor. It's like, I need all the things
Totally.
to support me to show up for other people. And this layer of learning is just another beautiful layer of support, Andrea. So thank you. And when Andrea and I started having this conversation about the masterclass, right away I knew that this was going to be a start and that we needed more. And so I said to Andrea, like, what more can we do together? Because I'm so passionate about supporting this community, the Inspired Results Group community, in this learning. So Andrea has graciously offered to create and facilitate a 2-hour workshop for us. So this is an offer I'm going to make to the Inspired Results Group community. And if you're new today to the masterclass, welcome to the community of incredibly curious, open-hearted leaders that we tend to attract. And this session, so we're going to put this in the newsletter. We're going to send you an email with the recording from today, a link to this workshop with more information. And I am so excited to go deeper in this conversation with you, Andrea, and continue to learn from you and see where that goes and then see what's next for all of us. So before I sort of start to close things out, Andrea, I just, of course, want to express deep gratitude for you and your presence and your gifts and your learning and your willingness to share it with us. Anything you'd like to share to feel complete today?
I think just, yeah, gratitude for the opportunity to be here and to have such an incredible group with us today and such great questions. I know we didn't quite get to all of them, but yeah, this is a journey. And so be kind to yourself in that and in navigating that. And figure out what those ways are that you need to support you so that you have the tools to navigate forward.
Mm-hmm. Gentle on the journey. So as you make your way into the rest of your day, whatever that looks like, could you just open up the chat box and just let us know what inspired you today? What inspired you in the masterclass today? And then we will wish you a fabulous Friday and a glorious weekend at home. Like every other weekend. Yay. And know that we will be gathering again. I should have had this handy. I think it's June 9th is our June masterclass. Topic yet to be determined. I'm totally open to input on that. If there's a topic you'd like us to bring to the masterclass, please let us know. And just know how much I appreciate all of you making time to show up for yourselves, show up in this conversation, and just be part of this ecosystem. Super grateful. All right, good stuff coming in the chat. Thank you. Yay. Back to Hollywood Squares. Thank you for all the comments in the chat. So beautiful, so insightful. And for those of you we met today, thank you for coming. So great to have you here.